the question is always, do I have trauma? And if you're in your quarter life crisis, then you'll be like, yes, I am just an entire human being of trauma right now. The short answer is yes, everyone has it because it is unavoidable and it is inevitable. I think it's not a question of if we have been messed up by our parents, but rather how we were messed up, why it matters, and what we're kind of going to do about it. Why, go back and discuss it at all. I know it would be a way more fun time for all of us if we could all sit with a glass of wine and talk about how our parents wronged us. This is such a thing of like the Gen Zs, the millennials, the Gen Xs. Did you know, I was researching, we even have Gen Alpha, which is someone born after the 2000s. I feel very old. But that is not what we're going to do. I want you to see that it is not only a good thing, but it was your choice, your unconscious choice, yes, to be triggered and put on this earth with your parents so that you could grow in the way that you needed to become the person that you are ultimately destined to be. Welcome back, lovely humans, to another episode of Read That Again, a series that is a compilation of the incredible wisdom I am exposed to as a lifelong learner, a health and life coach, a psych major, a soon-to-be kinesiologist, and just, your resident well-being witch that believes in you and your magic. Starting with all of my friendies that are in their quarter life crisis, welcome to our club. We are attempting to be better here. So last week was Erik Erikson on why it is important that you're still figuring yourself out in your 20s. So go ahead and check that out. I will leave the video in the end screen so that you can go and watch that one because it was awesome. This time I wanted to look at a newer psychologist's view, and this is Dr. LaPera, and she's speaking all things trauma, which I know is like a trigger word and like a trigger thing for people at the moment, so I thought this is a good time to dive into it. There is a twofold problem. So the first problem is that we have been seeing trauma as this like big thing, whereas it's not. Trauma is inevitable. It happens to everyone, and as Dr. LaPera points out, birth is a trauma. Like your first experience of life is a trauma. And I think what would be wiser is if we could normalize trauma. Now this is going to be a two-part series because in this one we're just discussing the trigger point of trauma. Next week we're actually going to go through Dr. LaPera's trauma archetypes, how you respond the way you do based on how they traumatized you. I have developed like tools for each one. So very interesting stuff, so definitely tune in for next week. I want to read something that I wrote in mentioning how normal trauma is, that it is a normal and inevitable part of life, that this does not mean that it's going to define us and destine us for a life of unresolved suffering. But we get to see our trauma as a messenger for helping us evolve into what we were destined to be. Or at the very least, not carrying generational trauma forward. As I explained last week, when we heal our generational trauma, we are healing 8 years ahead and 8 years back. Because you already know you're going to mess up your kids enough by yourself. Imagine you also want to bring along all the trauma that you experienced. So this is a vitally important thing, actually dealing with this and moving forward from it. This changes the narrative to no longer questioning if we have experienced trauma, but rather turning to what trauma that we subconsciously might have asked for by choosing our family in this life is trying to teach us. Trauma is just like a part of life and growing the same way that losing your teeth are. What I do want to distinguish is that there is a difference between a trauma and a tragedy. Every tragedy is traumatic. Well, traumas aren't tragedies, so I will never tell you to make light of something like death or abuse, and no psychologist or therapist or holistic healer would do that. I just wanted to separate those two, and I'm speaking specifically about trauma today. Yes, get a little bit more nifty into why it's a good thing that your parents messed you up. This is my unpopular opinion, and my witchy woo-woo ways is I truly believe that you chose your family. So the trigger and the trauma that you're experiencing, remember, not a tragedy. The triggers and the traumas were actually chosen by you unconsciously. My theory is that we come onto the earth and we choose our family because of the triggers, the traumas that they're going to cause us to have. Because we have this purpose on earth, and it is to grow in a certain way so that we can have uplifted the collective consciousness in the way that our unique soul can. And if you don't have that growth then you get to come back for a second, a third, a fifth, a 100th life until you actually get to. Which leads me on to what happens when we die. One theory that I really enjoy is when you die, you go up and you meet who you could have been. That gets me a little bit. Your choices are either meeting your identical twin, which is a fulfilled life, or you meet the tragedy that is your unfulfilled potential. One of my greatest fears. In an effort to not go up and meet someone that you barely recognize, we do all of this inner work so that we can essentially meet our identical twin. We experience the traumas and we choose to learn and grow from it because those are our only two choices. We either evolve or we stagnate, which is another form of a death. What is interesting though is that we often blame other people for our trauma when in reality it is our perspective and our lens at the time, which doesn't mean that trauma is your fault either. I want to show you the inevitable nature of it all. For example, one that is commonly spoke about is when kids get left in the car and might develop some kind of abandonment issues, left in the car while their mum goes shopping, for example. So that's one that you're like, some kids are really triggered by that. For some people, it's a no-brainer. It doesn't even register as an event. So it's not so much what the event is, it's your lens at the time, which is something that you are born with. You know, some kids are innately born more fearful and more scared, which lends itself into my whole theory of you choosing your family and essentially choosing your own trauma. So it's like choose your trauma character and also choose your own journey. This is the thing about cliches. Often they are universal truths. So this idea of life's what you make it, that good old cliche saying, actually turns out to be true because it really is like us that made our own traumas. It is our lens at the time that caused that event to be traumatic, a seemingly normal event to be traumatic, which is how I came up with the trauma formula. So I said it is the lens that you view life through at the time, plus a triggering but possibly very everyday event, which gives you a jarring physiological response that is remembered and stored in the body and subconscious mind, and that is what essentially creates a trauma. And like I mentioned, it's as small as being left in the car, or it is being publicly ridiculed for feeling a certain emotion, for example. So they can be big or small. It doesn't matter about how it feels to other people. It actually has nothing to do with other people because in your mind and in your body, it feels like a life or death moment. And that's what creates that kind of like block of energy, as we might think of it in something like kinesiology, that will remain there as a trigger unless you have it flowed through. Which is also interesting because when I look back at my 5-year journal, I do like a 1 line a day. When I look back and sometimes I'll be like, oof, today just feels really heavy. And if I go back and look like 2, 3, 4 years ago, there might have been a really significant heavy event that I dealt with on that day. And me, for example, last year having worked through a lot of that stuff, actually this year I'll go back and I'll read and I'll be like, that's so crazy because I mentioned 3 years in a row how impacted I was by this event. And last year having dealt with it, when I come to that same time, same day this year, I don't have that same reaction. And so I really do feel that it's like the emotion has flowed through me and it is no longer a stored trauma in the body. That is for me the power of kinesiology as well. We are meaning-making creatures, and that's what makes us different from animals, is our ability to imagine, create, reflect, and make meaning out of things. It is sometimes my toxic positivity trait to try and make things positive and try and see the good in everything. As I mentioned, your choice, you know? If I have to imagine my life as a series of unfortunate events, it's going to be pretty bleak. But if I get to imagine my life like a movie, which I do all the time, and I get to see things happening for me, it's just, you know, in a world where we don't actually know what the outcome's going to be, why not choose magic? Why not choose the one where life's ordained and happening for you? It sounds like a way more positive and exciting way to live. Another pertinent question is, why bother looking back at it at all? In which case I turn to Tony Robbins, who believes in the 6 human needs, one of them being significance. And if you want to be truly seen and truly accepted and truly belong, which Brene Brown explains is a really vital part of being a human being, then you need to see yourself. If you want to be wholeheartedly, here I am, everything I have, the good, the bad, the ugly, accepted, you need to be able to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. Once we do that, we have a choice. You know, do I want to let those moments define me, or do I ultimately want to release those traumas and work through them so that I don't make the same mistakes that my parents did, or because I can have a vision of who I want to be and I have the integrity to show up in the ways that helps me heal to become that person in order to one day meet my twin. So this week has a little bit less actionable things. It's more just being like, read that again, is that trauma is inevitable, that being born itself is a trauma. There is a difference between a trauma and a tragedy, why it's important to deal with those traumas or see those traumas. Hopefully the power of what we can do once we understand them. I gave you a little trauma formula. Also making sure that we take the blame off of our parents and other people or even ourselves and realize that it is just a part of life. But it gets to be a part of life that either helps us grow on this beautiful journey of our belonging, or it gets to be a part that we get stuck on for the rest of our lives, and then we have to come back in 3, 4, 5, 100 years and learn that same damn lesson every lifetime until we actually get it right, so that we can evolve as a collective consciousness. Anyway, so I'm very excited next week to present to you the different archetypes, which I think you'll have fun identifying yourself in, making sure to make it really actionable by giving you tools and empowering you to learn from it. Remember to like and subscribe and do all of those fun things. We hope that you enjoyed, and I will see you next week for another How to Deal with Your Quarter Life Crisis episode of Read That Again. See you next time.